Everyone is talking about AI adoption, but the real question is AI actually failing or are organizations not ready to make it work? Welcome to another Tech Social. I'm Gabby, your host today, and joining me as a moderator is Edgar, as always, Edgar Martinez. And today we are joined by Amy Wang, an HR executive and AI leader with more than 20 years of experience across HR, operations, IT, and shared services. Our topic today is AI is unfolding, organizations are. What's breaking behind the scenes? We'll explore why AI initiatives often struggle, not because the technology lacks potential, but because organizations are dealing with deeper issues, maybe like unclear ownership or fragmented workflows, broken processes and teams that are expected to change without the right structure behind them. So that's what we are going to be covering today. If you have any questions, you can let us know. We are live on LinkedIn and YouTube. And with that said, Edgar, over to you.
Mhm. Thank you, Gabby. Yeah, we are excited to have Amy here with us today. Thank you, Amy, for joining us. And I believe one of the aspects, right, mainly, I'd say mm, one of the aspects that we tend to forget whenever we are talking about AI is that for the AI to work inside enterprises and companies, they need to have a clear strategy. Many times we focus on the technology, but not really, we are not really seeing what needs to be there as a baseline for the AI to be successful, right, in this company. So we are excited to know more about your experience, Amy, and also, in general, what you have seen in terms of how organizations need to be prepared to start implementing AI in their processes. With that being said, welcome again. Please tell us a bit more about yourself and a bit about what you have seen lately happening in AI in the enterprise landscape.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the invitation and to be able to join the conversation with the two of you today. So I appreciate that. Thank you. As Gabby has said, I spent most of my career leading at the intersection of people, operations, technology, most recently leading HR and shared services for Mercedes-Benz North America. Prior to this, I spent much of my time in higher education and healthcare. Today, I lead my own Boss Strategic Advisory, where I work with enterprise organizations and startups around operating models, execution, product evaluation, and helping organizations navigate change, especially as AI starts reshaping our work and what that will look like in the future, right? And so I'm also exploring partnerships right now with leading for the next leadership opportunity. And I'm also excited to be having these conversations with you because I'm seeing firsthand that AI really isn't a technology challenge. Really, it's an organizational one. And so, in addition to having conversations like this, I also write regularly for and contribute to the leadership content for SSON, which is the shared services outsourcing network around HR shared services, talking about AI operating models and what organizations are actually experiencing behind the scenes. And so, a lot of what I've been writing about is really coming directly from the patterns I'm seeing across leaders in organizations. So, if you want to check that out, please check there as well. So I think, to that extent, I think what we're seeing are patterns where, technology is being thrown in, but it's really not foundationally what's wrong with organizations. It really isn't solving the core problems. And I think that's where I think Gabby had invited me to kind of talk a little bit about some of these thoughts as you may want to, as we delve into this further.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, definitely. The first thing that comes to my mind is whenever we are talking about these operation models, right, for AI. In your experience, what are like the most common organizational cracks, if we can, like namely that way, right? That AI is exposing when we are working in this space. I mean, what kind of things do you start seeing immediately after you hear that the company wants to implement AI, and what are the first things that you notice happening when they want to move this way forward?
So I think as each time we've had new technology come in, right, new cycles of technology, it's really not about the technology itself. So I've seen long before AI was the thing, and whether it was back when we were implementing all these other different technologies, I would say that during, for example, shared services work, we sometimes hear that a system or process is failing or something. But once you dig in, you realize it's really not a technology problem. It's maybe different teams had different assumptions around the ownership of the work, on the decision rights, like who's doing what. So maybe one team might say, I'm in charge of and own the intake, and maybe another team thought they own approvals, and maybe another team thought they would handle exceptions. And no one understands when handoff should happen, except the technology might have been designed to function exactly as it should. But when organizations aren't aligned across and how work should move and how things should be completed, I think that's where AI reminds us of me right now. It's what I think about right now is like it'll expose the gaps that were already there, where people are not clear on who's doing what. So like technology will help scale clarity, but it also will help scale any confusion, any type of bias that may have been in place as well. And I think all of that needs to be straightened out and really mapped out before you put technology in place. How do you actually harmonize all the different aspects of work and the details of work before you put in the technology?
Mm-hmm. Okay, and in order to do that, Amy, what's the regular process that you follow? Is it like, do you start with some discovery, or is it like a workshop kind of thing that you try to implement so you can start discovering these particular assumptions and gaps? How do you interact with people inside the organizations? What are the first steps that they should be aware they need to start taking now to improve their AI strategy?
Yeah, I think that, as organizations are seeing AI as just like a technology investment rather than opportunity to redesign work. In a previous project that I was responsible for, we had to consolidate different organizations, different entities in our company for payroll over a major HCM. And the technology itself was just one aspect of the work, right? The harder question, I think, when you're looking at new technology, whether it's with AI or just even something smaller or even larger, you have to understand who owns what, right? In this case, we had to decide, should the work be centralized? What decisions actually had to happen locally versus centrally? When do you actually make exceptions? The tools are just, you can install the tool, but I think redesigning the work, consolidating the work, and understanding, what is it that you're looking for at the end result is still key. And so AI feels familiar compared to implementing any other previous systems. And sometimes I think organizations just buy technology first and then redesign later. And so when I reference like payroll, there could be, a ton of like termination codes or, coming in late codes or whatever the different types of codes that you have. And if you don't consolidate all the different functions that you're putting into the system, you're not going to have the right outcomes, right? And so I think that the technology implementation is easier than changing how people actually do work. You have to know who's doing what when and the definitions of the work and what the outcomes are that you're expecting at the end.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Another question that I had for you was whenever we are seeing companies wanting to implement AI, right? And based on these gaps that we are mentioning, what I can see is that sometimes some leaders within the companies tend to underestimate what it means to have an AI strategy, right? As in, they mention that they will have an AI strategy moving forward, or perhaps they start putting some things together. But at the same time, what I feel is that not every aspect is covered within that initial view of what they want to implement, right? So, in your experience, how is it? What would be these aspects that they should be taking into account that belong to systems that operate with AI, that perhaps they are kind of underestimating at plain sight, let's say, at the beginning of their journey.
Right. I think often there's like a disconnect, right, between thinking about what leadership wants and what employees actually experience, right? So like there's a lot of excitement, I think for leadership when there is new technology that they're able to approve and implement and purchase. But sometimes the frontline experience, the people who are doing the work may see a different reality, right? So I've seen situations where leadership is really excited because there's dashboards now and we can show progress and we can show adoption. And that's really exciting from a leadership perspective, to be able to report that. But I also think it's important that there's a check-in point to sit with the employees and to see if those conversations that the employees are experiencing match, the excitement, the data that you're seeing in the dashboard, the progress and the adoption that you believe there is. Because I think sometimes people are asking things like, there could be the the fear of change, just uncertainty, and people could still be asking, am I still accountable for if what we're doing is wrong, right? Do I trust this enough so I'm not double checking, right? Because we talked a lot about, you're redesigning workflow, you're changing work as part of implementation. And so you really have to be clear when you change the work and you implement the technology that people know now with a new system what they're actually accountable for. And so I think it's really important that, leadership may be very focused on efficiency. And I agree that's important. But I think you have to also vet your employees to understand where their focus is. Are they only focused on risk and clarity? Because otherwise, that means it's maybe not as natural as you were hoping that implementation was, right? So strategy can sound super exciting, but to the employees, the workflows will feel very personal. And that's something that those two pieces have to align, I think, for true success.
Mm-hmm. And I think you touch very critical points here, right? One is for sure the process of the change management. And in particular, you also mentioned what employees might be feeling, right, in regards to seeing this new technology. And you also mentioned things about trusting the tool, right? And I think these are critical aspects, even the nature of how AI tools work, right? And the fact that sometimes they are not deterministic, meaning sometimes they may not be 100% accurate, right? And there needs to be some kind of guardrails and in particular training, I'd say, for the users, right, to actually interact efficiently with the tools. So first of all, how do you think would be or is the best way to talk to the employees to understand what are their feelings about using these new tools, and perhaps they are feeling insecure, right? What is the type of conversations that you hold with them to make them understand the tools better and let's say the reach they have and the responsibilities that they'll have operating these systems?
Well, I think adoption and trust are very interconnected. And one of the things that you can look at is, and they're both very relatable, right? When it comes to change, you have to be able to help build trust with your employees so they will adopt whatever changes you're looking for, especially with new technology that you've spent so much money on. So one thing I've learned over the years is that, employees will rarely maybe reject a system publicly. What they will do instead is create a number of workarounds, right? So they can maybe create their own spreadsheets outside of the main system that you just implement. And they'll even share these spreadsheets and track additional information on these spreadsheets. They could be emailing people on the side. They could be double checking in outputs manually. Or heck, they could even be entering the data that on behalf of somebody who should be using the system or the system should be generating just to show success. In a previous role many years ago, I had to implement medical systems. And my analyst teams were responsible for the data that would be the output. But the issue was the physicians that were supposed to put in the systems weren't always willing, weren't always able to, or didn't have the capacity to put in data. But the certain analyst was so committed to showing success in the system that they were entering the data themselves just so that you have the data to show reporting, right? And I think that's an example where adoption didn't really work as expected because the wrong people were putting in the data that you actually needed. It was the person that was supposed to be looking at the output, not the one that was supposed to be the same as putting input. So sometimes, from a dashboard perspective, adoption could look great because if you didn't know what was happening behind the scenes, you would think that, wow, we're getting all the reports and the data that we needed and the system works. Right. But if there's people behind the scenes that are quietly compensating for gaps in trust, that becomes a problem, right? So usage doesn't always equal trust in these systems. You really have to, pivot from talking to leadership and looking at what the outcomes are, but then going back to the employees, the front line, and see how the use is. And those two have to really match. Otherwise, you're missing something. So I feel like there's always opportunities where you need to make sure that you're giving people the opportunity to reject the system in their own way and help build the trust so that they're actually using it, because they're not going to do it publicly. You really do need to make sure that people are truly adopting the systems, right, to get the outputs you want. And this is even more critical as you're using AI, because these could be the people that are creating the prompts, right? You don't want them to put in the wrong information or in the wrong whatever concepts they have in their head to get the wrong output. So we're even seeing more criticality in making sure that there's employee trust that ties into adoption.
Mhm. Okay, so that sounds to me, first of all, as different types of AI systems that can be implemented, right? And in particular for agentic systems, I'd say it's crucial to understand how the users, as you were saying, right, are actually using the tool and create this, what's called the flywheel, right? So you can get this feedback from what the users are doing, then you can start also improving the tool from that. So it's like building this ecosystem, I would call it, where we have these interactions back and forth, and then we can actually start shaping an operation that, as you were saying, redesigns the way in which work is happening, right? So I definitely think that makes a lot of sense. Connecting this way in which the employees are actually using the tool and help them reject the system. I think that's a very interesting point of view. Um, Based on your experience, whenever a employee is able to reject the system, um, what happens next after one particular employee says, you know what, I either don't trust this tool or I don't understand how to operate it, or it's not complying with what I need? What would be, in your experience, the next steps after you give them that freedom to reject it, right?
All right. Well, I think that human oversight already exists around work already, right? So I keep thinking about how much oversight is really needed as we can continue to build these systems. And I think it's still very important to have continuous performance conversations, right? I think employees always need escalation paths. There should be quality reviews. There should be metrics. And so, especially as organizations move towards AI agents, right? They're now the ones influencing decisions and workflows, and we often assume that they can even operate independently. And to me, it feels a little bit incomplete, right? So, if AI is complete participating workflows, should we be asking like who reviews the outcomes, who monitors the drift, who owns the accountability? So it almost feels like not only there should be performance reviews for the humans, but there probably should be some type of performance reviews for the AI agents as well, right? They both need their own performance reviews just to make sure that, as the systems continue to move really fast, I feel like there's more guardrails that have to be clear and in place for all those that are part of this. Otherwise, a lot of what you're trying to create could be just easily derailed.
Mhm. That's very true. And what happens? I think part of the dream that the bigger companies selling AI are trying to sell is that AI is able to actually automate roles, like entire roles, right? Based on my experience, I think it's more about still, as you were saying, keeping a human in the loop, and in the end, getting these systems with some supervision about the way they are operating and the outcomes that you are getting out of them, right? But in your experience, do you feel AI at any particular point is able to execute what we would call like complete roles by itself? Or this redesign for how the companies operate definitely needs to include humans in the loop to really, supercharge the work that they are doing with AI and not simply relying in pure AI automation. What's your experience in that regard?
So I feel I've seen organizations automate and try to standardize work with really good intentions, right? Only to discover that they maybe unintentionally scaled those issues faster and bigger. So instead of solving, confusion, sometimes they accelerate it. And I think, once there's like a flawed process, it's embedded in there, you're just going to magnify it and it's going to be harder to unwind. But I do believe that, AI obviously has enormous potential, but it can also amplify friction in an organization if the structure underneath it isn't solid. I wrote a couple things in just LinkedIn that I talk about just basic things that I've seen in my experience with organizations and even customer service. So, for example, there's something I posted a while back about how I went to a restaurant, and at that particular restaurant, I had ordered a BLT and fries,
Mhm.
and the employee took it upon themselves to give me a BLT sandwich and white rice
Mhm.
because they made the assumption that someone like me would rather have rice than fries.
Okay.
And so when you have these like human biases, right? They're the ones also putting in prompts into AI. So you have to have humans in the loop just so you can validate, I think, the outcomes of what people are putting in because you just don't know. And when we talk a little about trust and adoption, right? If there's not if the humans in the work are not feeling secure in their roles, you're going to see more of these things as they're putting that in because they're fear of replacement.
Right.
Mhm.
But even other more harmless things, another test I tried was just try to, create a new, it was to look at new colors for spring and fall and summer, so like if I were to wear different colors, what would be my best colors, right? And don't change my face, don't change anything else. And the first few pictures of me, I looked okay, but somehow the system decided that it would change my hair, my face, and everything. So I started off okay, but then as each progressive thing changed, I looked totally different.
Mhm.
So, and maybe, what I was using wasn't as advanced, or even maybe the tech will continue to change. But this is where I think has to be someone who is, or someone's who are validating it, just in making sure that, things aren't being flawed. And maybe that's where the performance review for agentic AI agents should exist as well, because they need to see that, maybe first and second and third repetitions are good, but then subsequent ones may be bad. But I do feel that, things still could equal confusion, even with good intentions, and more so if good intentions aren't really the right intentions, you can see a lot of problems, right? So AI can definitely accelerate productivity, but it can also accelerate, I think, dysfunction as well.
Mhm. Okay. So I think another aspect that has to do with trust, right, is also whenever you are operating with AI systems, who should be accountable for the result, right? Many times I feel we tend to think, okay, it's AI, it's running the process, and um, and it should be doing it correctly. But what happens when it is not, right? So, in your experience, who should be accountable when these AI assisted decisions, for example, go wrong?
Yeah. I mean, even like in the news, right, when things have gone rogue, I think, wasn't it? I think it was like Workday or one of the major HCMs was showing bias in hiring. It was in the news. So this is
Mm,
where, even with the best intentions and the best ideas, there's needs to be oversight and needs to be some type of just ensuring that things aren't going rogue, like you're saying, that, some, even though, because I was citing in my own experience, some very small basic things, right? And so the impact really was me, ultimately, just when I was putting in my own prompts, or when I give the example of that restaurant, if that person was putting in the prompts for how to serve a customer, think about how many people could be impacted with their idea that this is what customer service is looking like. This is the idea of what a customer will want based on how they appear. Their appearance dictates that they would rather have rice versus fries.
mm,
So mine was a single scale in customer experience. But if they were now that person putting in prompts saying, you know what, if someone orders this and they look like this is what they should get, and we'll automatically replace this as the right customer service opportunity. I mean, you just magnified the scale of mistakes like so significantly, right? So it's unintended bias, unintended mistakes like that could really make a big impact, I think, on a company or organization.
mhm. Okay.
Amy, sorry, Ed. I want to sort of move into like governance being like one of those words that either makes people feel safe or makes their eyes like glaze over immediately. But you're making a case that governance isn't just a compliance checkbox. It is actually one of the things that make AI work like operationally. Can you break down what real AI governance looks like inside an organization versus what most of the people think it looks like?
I think it's multi-level, right? I mean, it's not just at the technology level, but it's at every single level, right? So inside the governance, inside organization, I think governance should be around the people and the processes. There should be definition of who owns what. There should be escalation paths. There should be quality checks. There should be decision rights, accountability, consistency. Those things matter. And it has to be something digestible for employees at every level, right? So, at every level, what does that look like? Whether we're talking about the purchasing and acquisition of new technology. So, there should be governance around that, around the implementation, around the use, and even what goes in and out of it, right? So meaning like, when do you actually change how you use it? What do you change? What is the data that comes out of it? Who can make changes? Right. So this is where like, traditional models like RACI is going to be so important, because you're going to really understand, like, you need to know who's responsible for it, who's accountable for it, right? Who needs to be informed. Those are going to be so critical, because at the rapid speed and pace things are happening and changing, if you are not clear on those paths, I think you're going to create chaos.
Mhm. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And another of the debates that I've seen online is how much governance is too much, and it starts, like slowing down innovation, right? So, in your experience, how can companies strike that balance between actually implementing effective governance for their AI initiatives, but at the same time giving some or the right room to actually reach innovation through these technologies, Amy?
I think this is something that most organizations, before even AI, has always struggled with, right? Because there's going to be large enterprise organizations that have structure, you have large systems, and you can't make these changes, but then you also want to be able to rapidly innovate. And so being able to find that balance, so that you can kind of run kind of bimodally in an organization, I think is really critical because, so if we're talking about enterprise organizations, they may already have established large systems that they've had for a very, very long time, but they too want to be able to innovate and accelerate. So I think finding that balance maybe with your existing partners, right? So, if you already heavily invested in a large enterprise technology, is there an opportunity to partner more closely with them, sit on their advisory boards, work with them so that you're able to innovate in tandem and help develop that? Or is there ways that you can have maybe smaller innovation hubs within your organization, right? Like, so maybe like create a venture studio, I think that's what people call them, or other little way to kind of really do their own startup ventures, or do or bring in things where it's more contained, right? So that you have that balance of your large enterprise and then smaller parts where you can innovate, try new products and services in more contained before you can bring it into the larger organization.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think that particular word balance, it's critical for any AI initiative, particularly modern AI initiatives. And I think you can see it everywhere. I mean, even when you are thinking about implementing solutions, for example, with LLMs, and that you cannot go too low in the context, but you cannot go too high either, right? And you have to have that balance for it to work. So, what about the strategy of the companies? I mean, would you agree that, or what do you think would be more dangerous for companies right now? Employees not using AI versus employees using it without understanding the limitations of the tool. What would be the right balance there to get started and in general to operate with AI systems?
I think it both can be risky, right? I mean, there's
Mhm.
organizations where employees can bring in their own tools. I think that's even the scariest, right? Where if you're not really you purchase, that's more of a change building trust and maybe development situation, right? If you're buying too fast and you're not using it, now you're just risking your budget and your finances, and maybe causing confusion because you're adding tools. But I think even riskier are opportunities where companies will go directly to the employee level and they're buying and using tools within the company that's unvetted and maybe without any contracts in place and without any guardrails in place. I think that's the riskiest, is people are bringing their own, and that would be an example maybe because either there is this too much restrictions, like, so this is find that balance, right? Maybe there's too much restrictions and people can't use new tools or don't have the opportunity, or maybe the tools that are brought in hasn't been shared properly, not communicated, maybe not there's not proper change management put in place, so it's not adopted, or leadership is bringing in just too much, and people are like, well, if you're going to bring in all this, maybe I can just try something else just to keep up, right? So I think having a really clear roadmap and strategy in who's responsible for what and who's doing what is critically important, because otherwise you're going to see, and I've seen large enterprise companies where they have started small and become large enterprises back when you can kind of scroll and click and buy your tech directly. I mean, people can still do that now, and we've seen organizations do that. And I think it becomes a lot riskier with AI because you can just buy it and use it on your computer. And who knows what company data and information is going to be in there because you're not putting in enough controls or too many.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that you also mentioned about this difference, right? Or in particular, how smaller companies can grow and really start functioning as a big enterprise company. So, in your opinion, what would be the difference between adopting AI for the startup ecosystem and how that differs from adopting AI for a larger company? What could be
Mhm.
the differences there?
Because
Um,
from Sorry,
Oh,
just to add something to this, I think like from the outside, it seems like startups should have an advantage, if you might, like they move faster, they have less bureaucracy, and often like have more risk appetite instead of like big companies. So that was a question that I had in mind. I wanted to ask you. So what do you think it's the difference, and who would move faster actually?
I think it's faster in different ways, right? So like I think typically, well, I mean, not all, but like I feel like the startups can move faster in a way because they have maybe strong ideas about technology, but sometimes they may not have, um, maybe the funding or whatever they need or the structure to do it. So I think it's different. Where and then enterprise organizations, they might not be evaluating the technology alone. I feel like enterprise organizations are thinking bigger in a sense that you're trying to move a larger ship, right? And they might be evaluating more governance or risk, integration to the existing systems, any security, workflows, the change impact. And a startup might think, oh, this tool works. This is good. And maybe it's probably more complex than that I'm describing. But I mean, I think from an enterprise, they look at how does this fit in our very, very complex organization with multiple stakeholders, so many competing priorities, and there's so many conversations. And I think also like even maybe, and I think maybe selling to a enterprise organization is different than someone selling into a startup. If you have a product, I think that even that relationship is different, right? It's maybe a little bit more casual with a startup in terms of if you have something you're trying to sell to them for implementation versus a enterprise company, because that takes, I think, a lot more time before you even get into talking about all those topics I mentioned. It's that building the relationship and trust in trying to get into those larger companies. So I think they're just very different conversations, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So having like a very strong product and successful operating model inside a large organization, I think is very different than, a smaller organization. So I think it's just very different in how the entry point is and the time it takes to not just implement, but to actually find that partnership opportunity.
Right.
Mhm.
And then about metrics, I think we are in a moment where, like, a lot of organizations think or are measuring AI success by how many tools they have deployed, right? But we've been talking a lot about how organizations that actually win are not the ones with more tools. So, what is the metric that actually matters?
I think to me, the trust and adoption piece is what matters, right? You could have a ton of tools, but if your employees are not using it and or not using it correctly, it doesn't even matter, right? Because then you just have another thing that's sitting on the theoretical shelf, right? So even though you can't really visually see it, but it's another thing you shelved that you've just invested in. So if people aren't adopting it, if it's not part of everyday work, it's not part of what's moving the business forward. It doesn't really matter how many you have. It's really truly, I think, how effective they are and how much it's being embraced by your employees.
Got it. Amy, I want to ask you a personal question. You've been inside organizations, right? Small ones, big ones, and sometimes the diagnosis is uncomfortable, right? The problem isn't the AI budget, but maybe it's the culture, or it's the structure, or the leadership. How do you deliver this message to a room full of people that are expecting you to talk about technology?
I think there's a couple of ways that you have to go about it. I mean, partly you do have to be quite honest and frank if that's the role that you're in there to take help with change, right? To really embrace change and really build trust, you have to do it with the idea of like just being really honest, but not in a way that kind of destroys the trust or relationships, but you have to be frank about this is what it'll take to really implement successfully. And if you show the intention of success, which is really what you're trying to do, you do have to go in with this. This is why I always feel like, part of any implementation, it's clear you need to understand who the stakeholders are, what is it they're getting out of it, and what are their responsibilities. And also within each of the functional teams that they may have, well, what are their responsibilities in this? And then if there are gaps and there are things wrong, maybe you're not identifying the people specifically, but you are going to have to lay those topics out. And I would suggest before, if it is really tough news, you obviously wouldn't do it in the big room initially first as the first time. I highly recommend that you warm up those conversations behind the scenes to the leaders who those respective areas may not be the strongest in the adoption, or may not be maybe the the areas that need the most fix, or whatever it is. Have those conversations one-on-one before you present broadly, and try to be aligned when you have those conversations. So the idea is to build trust, right? And you do want skin in the game. You do want everybody to be together when you're implementing something new. So you can't just lay it out there, bad news to everyone up front in the first time. So really try to cultivate that message one-on-one, behind the scenes, and then bring it forward, because you don't want to shock or surprise anybody. Otherwise, you're not going to have a productive conversation when you're trying to say, these are things we have to change in order to be successful.
Definitely. Okay. I do have one last one, but I wanna leave it for the end. So Ed, if you can.
Yeah, that's good. I believe these kind of conversations, Amy, that you were mentioning, right, and how you're bringing context, um, are crucial to actually manage to align the strategy and in general the adoption of AI. So one of the things that I can think about and would also like to know is, let's say that you're finding resistance also not only from the employees but also in the C-suite, right, to implement or to adopt AI. What happens then? Because you're not necessarily talking to a employee in the forefront of the operations, but rather somebody who is making the decisions, right, to actually implement or not a particular technology. So, what is the difference, and what kind of strategies have helped you in the past, to show the value that AI can bring to that particular person, department, in the end to the organization? Um, how are these conversations? What kind of things you have to uncover for them, so they start seeing AI as a solution or a potential solution to the things that they are facing, as opposed to a threat or simply a bubble or any other kind of rejection that they may have.
Right. So I guess it depends on what their role is in terms of when we say leadership. Is it one of the leaders on many that are just rejecting it because it's a broader system that impacts everybody? Because maybe, so I think really understanding their viewpoint. So I would maybe spend time understanding, like, why are they rejecting it? Is it because they're losing control? Is it because they're losing FTEs? Is it because they're losing budget dollars that's getting moved to this new initiative? What is their impact? And first of all, I think you need to take time to understand, why are they rejecting it? And then you need to figure out, well, how do you frame this so they understand what is it in for them? What's the benefit for them to join this change, be part of the change? And that might take time, right? It might be a variety of reasons that will benefit them, but you have to spend the time to make sure you understand those types of things, because if you don't understand why they're rejecting it, it doesn't matter, and they're the ones holding it up, you're not going to be successful. So you really have to find ways to kind of figure out, what is it they're rejecting, and how do you help them win also, right? Because in order for these implementations to be successful, it has to be win-win. So what are they gaining? What can they gain that maybe they haven't seen? And how do you actually help them along so that maybe it's alleviating some of the fears? And you can't be 100%. Sometimes, things are being dictated from the top and you have no choice. But if you do have a choice, you want to build partnership with everybody at the table so that when you're doing these implementations, they have they feel successful too. They're part of it, right? And you want to keep them, especially if they're at the leadership level, let them be part of the stakeholders that you're giving regular updates for. So they're giving their input, they're able to give their requirements, after you understand like what is it that they're most concerned about and worried about. Try to make sure that you're including them in the path so that as you're designing these solutions, their design is part of what's being implemented.
Mhm. Okay. So normally in this kind of conversations, what I've seen is that many people want to see a quick win, right? Like a quick victory that in the end helps them buy in the idea of implementing more systems and really start adopting the different shapes of AI. So in your experience, what would be some quick wins that could work in particular? What particular areas do you think people can focus on and can expect to see some initial results, right? So they can also start convincing others about how things are really working with AI.
I think when you are doing your implementation plan, like upfront, be clear what your big milestones are, or even activities within the milestones, right? Understand what the activities are, what the milestones are, so that you've hit like points of implementation that are critical. And I would find ways to celebrate those, right? So whatever your implementation plan is, as you break it down, and I think that's important to align with the main stakeholders, what's the main milestones that show success in this implementation. I would make sure that employees are clear, and the managers are clear. So at all the levels, they understand that these are the critical milestones for success. And as you hit them, there needs to be communication in terms of, what you've done right, what things we should still learn, recognize key people that contribute in making those milestones successful, and do some type of celebration. It could be as simple as just, I don't know, something like if you're in person, maybe coffee. If it's virtual, it could just be something silly that you're celebrating in a virtual call, right? Just so that you can highlight that you've hit the milestone. And even though we have this much more to go, we've done these things successfully, because people want to feel good about what they've accomplished. And then if they're stakeholders or the leaders that are part of it, recognize them in their functional teams that they contributed to this success, so that everyone can see that these are the people that helped, and show, that there's recognition, there's some type of pat on the back that we're making it through the process that we're trying to accomplish. So I think it's important that upfront, what it is that you're trying to accomplish, and then you break down all the different pieces of it so people are aware as you hit those.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I believe we have explored different aspects, right, that companies should be aware of and take care of in order to be successful with AI. But in your experience, what should be companies, like how should they be in the lookout for, in particular, avoiding mistakes that perhaps in your experience you have seen companies repeating again and again when trying to implement AI, right? So what would be perhaps the top 3 things that you consider they should be aware of and keeping an eye on, so they can avoid these failures that other companies made at any point in their path?
I think you need to evaluate organizational readiness, right? Not every company is ready for new technology, new change. So I would first of all just know your landscape and know if this is where your company is. And if it's not, prepare them, right? And there's multiple levels of preparing, whether it's change management, whether it's understanding your workflows, whether it is understanding, the different capabilities that you need. I think another thing you need to be aware of is just, what are you trying to accomplish? Is there a goal in mind before you make a change? You don't want AI for the sake of AI. Just because everybody next to you on both sides have it doesn't mean you should too. So just, be prepared to invest when you need it. And third, it goes back to the environment, right? Don't just buy things so you can put on the shelf. Does it integrate technologically with your existing infrastructure, with your existing other vendor partners? Is it going to provide the data that you need to drive your business? Because at the end of the day, a lot of it is it not just going to be able to replace work or create efficiencies, but also you want to understand how to measure the outcomes and be able to produce that. Is it going to give that information you need? That goes back to step one, where, is your organization even able to understand what type of data they need, right? So I think there's all these different things I think need to happen first, and those could be mistakes and that people can make, organizations can make when investing.
Okay. And do you have any particular sources of information that could help as a primer for these companies and these leaders to start preparing themselves and their companies to understand a bit better what exactly is this new wave of AI, and what are the implications and these kind of things? Do you have any favorite resources that you could recommend, or in general, for you, it has worked better to read books, or actually, I don't know, seeing videos or going to events? What would you say is like the best way to start getting prepared for this transition?
Sure. I think there's a number of ways. One thing that I had recommended my previous organization, I recommend many organizations to do is, have your leaders really kind of get educated on the different topics, right? So one way that I advocate for is, so I actually am an advisor for Cornerstone University, which they have a strategic AI certification program. And through that certification, it's a course that you can take over, I think it is, I took it at a different pace, but you could take it at whatever pace. You get about a semester's worth of time to take the courses online, and there's tests, and you get a certification at the end. And what I love about the program is that, many organizations offer tuition assistance, and because it's accredited university, here, like most companies will offer tuition assistance maybe for $5,250. I worked with Cornerstone to offer the program for $4,995. So it's right underneath that window. And the benefit of that is that it comes with your own device. They actually provide a MacBook Air along with certification and the courses and a cohort. So you could actually learn how to do things on your own device versus using your company provided device. Because most companies do not want you experimenting on AI on their device and trying to put their information in, but to get your own, dedicated device, and you get to keep it after, I really encourage. And, so if anyone wants to reach out to me after this, I can give you the information. I think it's a great program, and they're continuously evolving it. So it's always upfront knowledge that, leaders are using, employees are using. It's a great way to just understand the strategy of AI and to say that, you've been certified, and they have other programs as well. And I think that's a great way to be educated. I attend many different roundtables and conferences to learn more, because by no means do I think I'm the expert or anything, right? But I talk to a lot of people through so much networking, through many articles. One of my favorites, even though they're not AI specific, but they work so much with future work and other HR leaders, is SSON. So this is shared services, whom I blog for. And also they have like amazing conferences that you really learn a lot about organizations, specifically, when my piece of it, I like the HR side of it, but they have all these different shared services. And many organizations, as they're moving towards a shared service, you learn more about that through that organization. So I would highly recommend, joining them. And there's other, partners that you can maybe learn from, that I've talked to, that I've enjoyed getting to know. So for example, I've made friends with an organization here in Palmer. So they go to shared services, they go to others, but I have a friend there. She also has she provides interim work. She provides people who are consultants or fractionals, so that you could actually even bring in people that come in, short term to help you check out your organization, assess your landscape, and maybe help you do implementations. I'm even doing that on the side as I try to figure out what I'm going to do next through my transition. So like myself, always available to help others for just conversation or really a true engagement. I think that's really important. Whether you're just sitting down having conversations like this because I feel like knowledge should be shared, or more of a formal process, partnership, contract to say, how do we dig in and work together for a period of time? So I think those are all opportunities as everyone's evolving. And I think that's the fun of it, is this community is continuing to grow, and these conversations are constantly being had. And there's so many experts out there and so many people, but I focus on the HR side. I love the HR side and what work will look like in the future, and these amazing products that people are seeing out there. I think that's really where this is going. And so I love being a part of the conversation. And this is why I was so happy when Gabby reached out to me, because I thought this would be so much fun talking to the both of you about, just imagining what else is out there and what is enabling organizations to be successful? Because it isn't just AI failing its own, right? What can we do to help people, the actual humans that are doing the work, be ready for the change? Because I think that's the most important part, is the human aspect, right? Because we're all human and we want to have a place in it, and we want our world to be better. And so it's so important that humans are in the loop, humans are part of it, and that we're doing this together.
Definitely.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah. Well, we're almost there. Amy, I do want to say I've been following Amy maybe for like 4 or 5 months now. I encourage everyone and invite everyone to go and find her on LinkedIn. She's been sharing a lot of, valuable content. Sometimes are just like insights, personal insights, or work related ones. But then I saw the other day that you were showing us how you use an AI tool to do like a headshot. And I thought that was very fun. And, I never saw that before. So I was like, this is a good tool, for people that don't want to spend money doing this. So a lot of, shortcuts and things like that. Thank you so much for wanting to participate in all of this, Amy. We do have 2 more minutes. So my last question would be, if you could get like any executive that is listening to this to do one thing starting tomorrow, but not a tool, not a vendor, call or a pilot program, but a shift maybe on the operational side or the leadership side, what would it be? And any final comments that you want to give us?
I think it's just important to bring your humans along with you, your employees. Make sure they feel they have a place, or at least understand where the place is, even if it's unfortunately not with them, but just be transparent, really build trust, because that's the only way these will happen, right? I feel like you need to come along together for this to be successful. So really listen to your employees, include your employees, help them be part of the solution. I think it is so critical that everyone's part of the solution together. Otherwise, it's just not fun, and there's no future without the humans. And so you want them to be part of it as much as you can, and embrace the change together, educate everyone so that they can move along and move forward together, and make sure everyone has a place somewhere in the process.
For sure. All right. Well, thank you again so much, Amy and Edgar. Any closing comments on your side?
From my side, I just want to say that it was great talking to you today, Amy. Thank you for all your insights. I think it's awesome how we managed to get to so many different topics, and how for each one of them you had one particular point of view that helped us understand better how to implement these AI solutions for so many different types of companies, right? And how we can still be included in the process, and that's the way for success. So thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you, everyone that joined us today. We'll be back soon. I'll let you know on LinkedIn. Have a good one. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much.
Bye.